babies over there. Okay, so tonight we're in Esther chapter 7, and Miss Amy's going to talk us through this, and we finally get Esther and Mordecai back after going on a hiatus a little bit with them, but it's a really, really good lesson. I think you'll really enjoy this. But let's start with prayer. As we let our two. Okay, let's pray. Dear Lord, we thank you for this beautiful day. We thank you for the rain that you give us. Thank you for this time now that we can come together and that we put our thoughts out of our mind and concentrate on your word. Just fill us with your spirit. Just to have an open mind and open hearts to take from these lessons what we need to apply to our lives to help us be more like Jesus. And thank you so much. In Jesus' name.
We're just talking about time flying. It just seems to be going so fast today. This past weekend, we were in Jacksonville, Florida, to see our kiddos. They're the ones that didn't get to come home for Christmas, so we took Christmas down, had Christmas and Easter, and we had planned to go to the sunrise service at the beach on Sunday morning. And I was so excited that we're all going to go because I love the beach. I love sunrises, so it's going to be all great. And my daughter-in-law was real excited. She kept looking at the weather, worried about the clouds. Was it going to be cloudy? Was it cloudy? Wanted a good. And so we got up Sunday morning, and the 3-year-old had spent the night up throwing up basically all night long. So my daughter-in-law decided that they would just stay home with the rest of us would go. So we went, and she said, "Send me pictures." So we were sending her pictures, in the dark, and then the sun began to come up. And as the sun rose, I just sent her a text, and I said, "I think the clouds are making it work." And she wrote back and said, "I think there's a lesson in that." And that has stuck with me all week long, and especially as I was looking at Esther, because she's been having some clouds. She's, it's kind of cloudy right now, but there's going to be a lot of beauty that comes from that. So, as Tammy said, we're in chapter 7, but the last time we saw Esther was in chapter 5, when she had invited the king and Haman to the first banquet. And then where she requested the second feast. And since then, quite a bit has happened to the king and Haman, not so much to Mordecai and Esther. Haman went home and was talking to his family, and together with their wise counsel, they make the plan to kill Mordecai earlier than everybody else. They're going to have this big pole they had built. And then Haman goes to talk to the king, and the king asks his counsel on what he should do for somebody he wanted to honor. And Haman lays out this big old long list because he thinks it's him. And so he says all these things he wants to have happen. And the king kind of throws him a curveball and says, "Oh, great, you go do that for Mordecai." And this part always makes me laugh because I could just imagine Haman dragging poor Mordecai through the street on that horse going, "This is what the king does for the man he wants to honor. This is what the king does." He is not all excited to be there at all. And then he went home with his little tail tucked between his legs, complaining to his wife, and to tell him that she tells him that he is probably not going to be able to defeat Mordecai. And her exact words were, "Mordecai, before who you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent. You will not prevail against him, but will surely fall." And so we're going to kind of keep those words in our mind as we go through, because we're going to come back to that a little bit. So Esther wasn't in any of those details. It was Haman and Xerxes, but God was. God was there, and he was orchestrating it all. And he's always there, and he's always working. Even when we don't feel or know that he's there, he's always there. Kelly had this quote from her book. She says, "He is active even when we should be but aren't, when we want to be but can't, and when we're far away, ill, or asleep." God's always there, even in all those situations. All right, so we're going to start with Esther 7. So let's look for Esther 7. And if somebody would read verses 1 through 5.
So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet, and as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, "Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted." Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing.
All right, so we're at the second banquet, and the king obviously knows that she's not just inviting them to banquets to enjoy their company. He knows there's something on her mind, and so he offers her again. He says, what is your request? And he makes that same promise. I'll give you up to half my kingdom. What do you want? And that's sweet. You know, it sounds real sweet. I'll give you up to half my kingdom. But it also shows that Xerxes has this impulsive nature. You know, we already saw it with Haman when Haman came in and said, there's a problem, we need to get rid of it. And Xerxes was like, okay, sure, here, you know, take my signet ring, go, do what you want to. So what are the things that she asked for? What's the first thing she asked for? Just spare my life. That's my petition. What's the second thing?
Spare my people.
Spare my people. That's my request. On page 133, there was a true and false question. It says, Esther specifically revealed her ethnicity and the ethnicity of her people to the king in verse 4. True or false? For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. And he probably had put two and two together. You know, he knows what that edict, I don't know what it says. But she didn't say, I'm a Jew. She didn't come right out and say it, because she's been holding on to that secret for a long time. She does go about her request in a very tactful manner, though. So what are some ways that she approaches him in a way that would kind of make him a little less guarded?
She asked him real nice.
She asked him real nice.
She said, if I found favor with you,
Yes.
you know, and if it pleases you.
Yes.
And she said it was so
Exactly right. I would not have even brought this up if we were just going to be in slavery, but that's not what's going to happen. And she also kind of keeps it vague. You know, she didn't come out and say with any accusations at this point. You know, it's just like, oh, something bad's fixing to happen. And, you know, I need some help here. So no accusations. And it goes on. Kelly then talks about the fact that she asked for him to spare her people as well as herself. She wasn't just looking out for herself. And then she kind of goes into this thing about, is self-care wrong? So, thoughts, is self-care wrong? What do they teach you on the airplane?
Put your mask on before you put your towel on.
Put your mask on first. Exactly right. Sometimes you have to take care of you to be able to take care of the people around you. In the book, Kelly says, of course we are to love and care for ourselves. We are beloved by Christ and made in God's image. Self-care is not selfish, it's responsible. At the same time, though, we are called to put the interest of others above our own. We are to be the kind of friends and spouses who take the posture of someone willing to wash another's feet. We're to actively look for ways we can serve. And so there's a balance, as in all things. We want to take care of ourselves, but we also want to be looking out for the interest of others and how we can serve. Then it goes on and talks about, well, just the king's reaction in verse 5. You know, who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing. He seems a little confused and surprised that his queen seems to be in danger and where it's actually coming from. But let's look back at Esther 3. This is where Haman comes to him with his plot. This is my one read verses 8, 11.
Then Haman said to King Xerxes, there's a certain group of people scattered among the other people in all the states. Their customs are different from those of all the other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not right for you to allow them to continue living in your kingdom. If it pleases the king, let an order be given to destroy those people. Then I will pay 750,000 pounds of silver to those who do this business, and they will put it into the royal treasury. So the king took his signet ring off and gave it to Haman, son of Haman, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jewish people. Then the king said to Haman, "The money and the people are yours. Do with them as you please."
So going back up there to verse 8, what is it that Haman doesn't really say?
Who the certain people are.
Yeah. Who are these certain people? There's just a certain people out there who are living differently than we live, and they're not really doing what what we think they ought to be doing. We need to get rid of them. And then here's where we kind of see Xerxes' non-leadership. Maybe is that a word? Non-leadership? He does not show good leadership, because what did he just hand Haman? His signet ring. And that signet ring was like his signature. When I was probably middle school, high school age, one of the big things is we would go to the mall and go to the Hallmark stores and get sealing wax and a sealing wax little thing. I can't think what you call that thing. Little stamp. And I had one, had a little fancy A on it. You get the little sealing wax and you take it home. You write to your friends and melt that little wax. Put that thing on, and they knew it was for me because it had my little A on there. Well, that's basically what a signet ring was. You would have some sort of an inscription or something on it that represented Xerxes, and they would either put putty or wax or even ink on it and stamp it, and that showed that that was from him. And so just to hand that off, he's like handing off all responsibility to Haman. And he didn't seem to be all that concerned about what Haman's or how Haman's actions would be reflected on him. That one's going to come back to bite him. He didn't ask questions. He even told Haman, "I don't need your money. You can keep that money you're going to put in the treasury." I guess that was like a bribe or something. I'm not sure. He said, "You don't." He said he just handed over complete control. All right, so let's continue with verses 6 through 10.
Esther said, "An adversary and an enemy, this vile Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out to the palace garden. Haman, realizing that the king had already decided to stay behind, begged Queen Esther for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she's with me in the house?" As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, "A pole reaching the height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai, who stepped up to help the king." The king said, "Impale him on it." So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided.
Esther finally gets her moment. She finally gets to point and say, he did it. And so, it was him. He's the bad guy. And what's the king's reaction?
Hanging.
Well, before that, we're going to get there. Before that, yeah, he's mad. He gets up and leaves. He storms out. And why do you think he left? I think there's a little bit of that in there, and that's what Kelly kind of pointed out in her book too.
He was processed. He had to process the
He
situation.
needed some time to think.
And he didn't usually do that.
Yes, exactly. Maybe he's learning something here.
That impulsivity was being tamed a little bit right there.
But I think he also has realized his culpability in all this. It's like, oh, that's what those certain people were. And this is, how it all kind of is reflecting back on him. Probably just needed some time. And he's mad. If you ever just needed to excuse yourself from a situation so you kind of get a cooler head and then come back.
Mhm.
And so he's out of the room, And Kelly in her book says that we know from Persian protocol that no one but the king should ever be alone with a woman from the harem. I didn't know that. Did y'all know that? I had no clue that that was like a rule. But if that's the rule, then as she points out, Haman should have left. When the king left, he should have left. And apparently they were the only ones in the room at that time. But then there's Harbona, so I'm not real sure how this works. But her thought was that he probably should have left when the king left. But instead, what does he do?
Follows over on the queen.
Yes. And I have to paint this picture for my fourth graders when I'm talking about this. This week too, so I'm just teaching Esther everywhere. Is that they weren't sitting like at a chair and tables like we sit in. No, she's reclining on the couch. And so when he falls on her, it's not like he's just falling at her feet or on her knees as she's sitting in her chair. He's probably like on top of her. And I don't really paint that graphic, but they get the idea, you know. And so while that's going on, who re-enters the room?
King.
The king. He says, well, I left the room and I come back and you're molesting the queen? And this part has always kind of, it says, as soon as the words left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Do y'all have any thoughts what that means?
They're gonna kill him.
Yeah.
One way or the
Put
other.
it back over his head is what I picture.
What'd you say?
Put it back over his head. What
Okay.
I picture.
Or, I'm like,
And I think they knew when he did that, that meant death.
Yeah. I guess it depends on what you think the antecedent to they is. Is it the words? You know, the words covered his face. You know, did he just flush? Did he blanch? Did he go white? Or is it actually like they, the people that are there, the servants, did they? And so kind of do some research. And there's opinions for both. But apparently it was a Persian and also the Greeks and some other people that if you were bringing a criminal in before the king, you would cover their face so the king did not have to look at them. And so in that moment, they probably physically covered his face somehow.
okay.
A pillowcase, grabbed a napkin, something, you know, whatever was handy there, they covered his face.
That's what I was trying to think of. A pillowcase.
And then who speaks up?
Mordecai.
The eunuch, one of the eunuchs.
Yes, Harbona, or Mathonics there. And he tells them, hey, there just happens to be this big old pole out here. He had big plans for it. You know, if you want to use it, king, it's out there. And every time I read this, it brings me back to where,
Mordecai.
I don't think I have the original verse. It's in chapter 2, I think, where it says, Esther found favor with everyone she met, or everyone that met her. I think this reflects back to that. Because Harbona could have just stood there and said nothing. But I think the respect that they all had for Esther, they were all upset to know that she was in peril. They wanted to see her protected. They probably had a good gauge on Haman's character as well. And it's like, we can take care of this problem right now and save our queen. And so they suggested that, and the king liked that idea. So Haman ends up with the punishment that he had intended for Mordecai. Sort of that full circle moment there. The king is able to save face because he is able to use the fact that he saw Haman trying to molest his queen as the reason that he's getting rid of him, instead of having to say, oh, I gave control to Haman to get rid of this people, and so what do I do now? You know, if he's guilty, then I'm guilty by association. So he found a way out, he saves his face, and doesn't have to admit his part of the plan at all. On page 135, she asks us to do a little personal reflection, because she's talking about how things have happened, probably not in the way that were planned out. It says, think about a time when you saw God move events forward in the right direction through the most unlikely, even disastrous of circumstances. What did you learn about God's nature through that experience? So can anybody think of a time you saw God move events forward in the right direction through an unlikely or even disastrous set of circumstances? Well, I know I've talked about this before, but when Keith lost his job when we were in Georgia, and I had said I would never come back to Jackson, Tennessee, just one, he applied with Fred's, and they had openings in Ripley and Iuka, and we didn't get either one of those. And then there were really new prisons there in the area where we lived, Jessup, and they needed like physical education or they needed people to work these guys out in the new federal prison. Well, his degree's in PE, so went and applied for those jobs while we were shooting. No, didn't get those jobs. Just like every door we tried to open slammed in our faces for about 9 months. And it doesn't seem, maybe it's not disastrous. It was disastrous to us at the time, to our family, felt like. But through that, here we are, back in Jackson, Tennessee, where God knew for multiple reasons that we needed to be. And so that's personal experience for me, where I can see how things didn't go out the way I would have planned them out, or that were not favorable for us, but it all worked out because God had his hand in it, and God knew what.
This is small, but my oldest is 27 and he is a cancer survivor. And we went for his last cancer checkup with the dye and everything. He's cancer free. Found an anomaly with his appendix during the cancer checkup. And had they not found that, it was very likely that his appendix would have ruptured. He was having some pain, but like a lot of men, he was just not paying attention very well to it. Cancer was a horrible thing. But without that cancer checkup, it's very likely that his appendix would have ruptured inside, which could be dead.
Exactly.
That seems small, but it's not to me.
Absolutely.
That's God looking out for him, even through cancer treatment.
Remember back when the tornado hit the East Jackson Church? And all the good that came out of it, they may not see it that way. I know what a blessing it was. Council worship.
I don't think if you asked them, they would say it was.
Just went there weeks ago for there. It's been 20 years. And they had a big celebration for it. And they definitely see all the good that came from that. What they got.
Yep. She goes on to say that God is in control at all times, and you can trust God's sovereignty in your banquet disasters. And then we're going to look at Colossians 1. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. So how does that scripture tell us that God is the supremacy of Christ?
everything that was ever made was made by him.
Exactly, all things were created. And I thought this was interesting, the visible and the invisible. I don't often think about him creating invisible things, but they're out there. So, and even all the powers, the rulers, the thrones, all that,
And us.
and us. And it says he's for all things, and I like this one. And in him, all things hold together. And I think that's kind of the thread that we're seeing through all this. I find great comfort in that he's holding all this together. That he's the head of the body of the church, and that through him we have peace through his blood. So we're going to go on then and look back at Esther 6:13. Jump back over to Esther. It's the part where she said, and told his wife, Zeresh, wife, and all his friends, everything that had happened to him. And his advisors and his wife said, since Mordecai will form your, I'm going to read it from this other version that I had in my notes up here because I like the wording a bit better. If Mordecai, for who you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him.
And he did.
He did, didn't he? He fell right on her. And that kind of started his downfall, didn't it? That's the turning point. Not first the king found out what he had done, and then that just sealed the deal for him. And it also refers back to, what was it that Mordecai had refused to do for Haman?
Bow down.
Yeah, he wouldn't bow down to him. But now here, not only is Haman bowing down before a Jew, but she's also a woman, you know. So there's that irony again about how God is using these things. And God is faithful to his promises. It says God's hand is on the story from beginning to end, yours and Esther's. And then it goes on and talks about, just to kind of hit myself, because it talks about Harbonah, that they have the pole there, and the king's response is to definitely take him out and impale him on it. And we can see that the king's rage, his anger issues, have already cost him one queen, Vashti, and she got rid of him for not following orders, and now he is going to be the one who's going to be kind of taking orders because he's fixing to give her some authority in just a few minutes. In Proverbs 26:27, it says, the one who digs a pit will fall into it, and whoever rolls a stone, it will come back on him. So Haman definitely dug his own pit there. He's fallen into it. And that rolling the stone, I think sometimes that's when we're trying to push things in our way, want to push and make things happen. And then sometimes that stone just comes rolling right back on us because we didn't ask for the right help. And then in 2 Peter 2:9 it says, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to keep the unrighteous under punishment for the day of judgment. So he's going to rescue the godly, and the unrighteous will be punished. Then she talks about that some people feel like maybe Esther's lack of passion toward Haman after all this was a moral failure on her part, but it kind of plays out in history. And I know, Theresa, I think it was you that had talked about the long-standing ill will between the Agagites and the Amalekites and the Israelites from way back. And so we're going to go back and look way back in the Old Testament again and go to 1 Samuel 15. this story in Esther's story. Samuel said to Saul, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites. In our story is related to the Amalekites.
Amen.
Yeah. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle, sheep, camels, and donkeys. So Saul summoned the men and mustered them at Telem, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 from Judah. Saul went to the city of Amalek and set an ambush in the ravine. Then he said to the Kenites, Go away, leave the Amalekites so that I do not destroy you along with them. For you showed kindness to all the Israelites when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites moved away from the Amalekites. Then Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt. He took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and all his people he totally destroyed with the sword. But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and the cattle, fat calves and the lambs, everything that was good. These they were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak they totally destroyed. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel. I regret that I have made Saul king because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. Samuel was angry and he cried out to the Lord all that night. Early in the morning, Samuel got up and went to meet Saul, but he was told, Saul has gone to Carmel. There he has set up a monument in his own honor and has turned and gone down to Gilgal. When Samuel reached him, Saul said, The Lord bless you. I have carried out the Lord's instructions. But Samuel said, What then is this bleating of sheep in my ears? What is this lowing of cattle that I hear? Saul answered, Soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and the cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God. But we totally destroyed the rest. Enough, Samuel said to Saul. Let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night. Tell me, Saul replied. Samuel said, Although you were once small in your own eyes, did you not become the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and he sent you on a mission saying, Go and completely destroy these wicked people, the Amalekites. Wage war against them until you wipe them out. Why did you not obey the Lord? Why did you pounce on the plunder and do evil in the eyes of the Lord? But I did obey the Lord, Saul said. I went on the mission the Lord assigned me. I completely destroyed the Amalekites and brought back Agag, their king. The soldiers took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God at Gilgal. But Samuel replied, Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrificing as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned. I violated the Lord's command and your instructions. I was afraid of the men, and so I gave in to them. Now I beg you, forgive my sin and come back with me, so that I may worship the Lord. Samuel said, I will not go back with you. You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you as king over Israel. As Samuel turned to leave, Saul caught hold of the hem of his robe, and it tore. Samuel said to him, The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to one of your neighbors, to one better than you. He who is the glory of Israel does not lie or change his mind, for he is not a human being that he should change his mind. Saul replied, I have sinned, but please honor me before the elders of my people and before Israel. Come back with me, so that I may worship the Lord your God. So Samuel went back with Saul, and Saul worshipped the Lord. Then Samuel said, Bring me Agag, king over the Amalekites. Agag came to him in chains, and he thought, Surely the bitterness of death is past. Samuel said, As your sword has made women childless, so will your mother be childless among women. And Samuel put Agag to death before Gilgal. Then Samuel left for Ramah, but Saul went up to his home in Gibeah of Saul. Until the day Samuel died, he did not go see Saul again, though Samuel mourned for him, and the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. So, what was it that Saul had left undone? Yeah, he didn't. Yeah, he was supposed to destroy everything, and he did not. And what did Samuel tell him that God valued more than sacrifice? Obedience, yes. And Kelly says the prophet Samuel killed Agag, but the Amalekites survived to fight against Israel for generations. And their specialty was attacking weak, vulnerable women and children. By designing the death of Haman the Agagite, Queen Esther has succeeded where her ancestor King Saul had failed, if she was aware of it or not. And then she goes on to point out that Haman is the last reference to Amalek in the Old Testament, and Esther finished what Saul had left undone. So God has finished what he started. Took several years there, but he was able to take care of what Saul had not done because of his disobedience. Whether or not Esther knew she was participating in God's promise to blot out the Amalekites, the message is powerful. She took care of what her ancestors had not. And goes on to say that we don't have to wage war with 27-foot gallows, but we do fight against the devil's schemes with weapons of a different kind. Look at those weapons in Ephesians. Guess what they are?
Prayer.
I want to read. I might be tired of hearing. Read 10 through 18. I have to read it all.
Which
Which
book?
chapter? 6. 10 through 18.
Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God, so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. Stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, and the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, and pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's.
All right.
You told me to stop at 18.
Yeah, 18.
Okay.
Yep, good job. So what are our weapons or our defense mechanisms that we have?
Shield,
We have a shield. Yes, we have a shield.
The belt of truth.
The belt of truth.
the armor,
Yes, the whole thing is the armor of God. He has equipped us to be able to fight whatever is presented to us. Belt of truth, breastplate of righteousness with our feet, the gospel of peace, the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, and then prayer.
Pray in the
Yes, we
Spirit.
have to pray in all things. And so Esther has accomplished what she wanted to accomplish. Haman is dead. The end of the Amalekites, whether that was her goal or not, has been, accomplished. But there's still that little tricky decree that's out there that has to be dealt with.
I think it's, wow,
So this is after the banquet in Esther 8, verses 1 and 2. It says, that same day King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. And so what did the king do for Esther? Saved her life, and then he presented her with something. It wasn't half of his kingdom, it was all of who? Haman's, yeah. She got all of Haman's stuff. Didn't you know that his wife, when she was told what was going on, she's like, I told you so. And Mordecai gets brought in. And why does Mordecai get brought in? He's no longer has to sit at the gate. Why is he inside now? Yeah. She's like, we're related. This is my uncle who raised me, or my cousin that raised me. And so he is brought in. And she gives him control over the estate. He's going to manage it for her. What does the king hand off?
The
To
ring.
Mordecai. There goes that signet ring again. This time, it's in good hands, but still, that just kind of makes me giggle every time because it's like the king is just throwing it out there if whoever wants it. So he gave him the signet ring.
I wonder if that is a part of the culture. I wonder if that's something cultural. Him handing off that signet ring, sort of like the king's hand type thing. I wonder if that's like a thing,
Maybe.
showing he's his right hand man or something.
Or that he trusts him enough to hand it off. to
Yeah,
him.
and it's definitely got to be that. But I mean, I just wonder if it's something cultural because.
Do some research. Kelly wants us to dive into Mordecai's, just his relationship or his role in Esther's life. And to do that, we need to go back to Deuteronomy. Do not deprive the foreigner or the fatherless of justice, or take the cloak of the widow as a pledge. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. The Lord your God redeemed you from there. That is why I command you to do this. And so God had commanded the Israelites to look out for the helpless and the vulnerable. And Mordecai took that to heart. When her parents were killed, I don't know if there was no one else. Maybe, it's like that lineage thing, like with Boaz, he was the next redeemer in line. So maybe he was the next one in line, but he did it, and he did it well. Because the kind of person we know Esther to be, that just shows us that Mordecai had done his job and done it well. And in that verse, they talk about helping the helpless. Because why? What are the people to remember when they look at the vulnerable and the helpless? Yes, God had taken care of them. He had brought them, he had rescued them from slavery. And so he helped them. They're supposed to help others. That kind of pay it forward kind of thing. Now we're going to go back to Esther and finish up there. Because we're still going to deal with this decree. We may not get to it tonight. Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. If it pleases the king, she said, and if he regards me with favor and thinks it is the right thing to do, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family? So she starts out begging, saying, please undo it. And Kelly points out that it's kind of crazy. The king who would offer her half of his kingdom can't undo a law that he made, that he had a hand in. But that was their rule. that there was the rule, it's written not only in here, but I think it's in Daniel too, where it talks about the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. We even saw that back in chapter 1, where he made the decree about Vashti in verse 19. It says, therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree and let it be written in the laws of Persian Media, which cannot be repealed. Those are some pretty stout laws. Can't do away with. And so her next request is, what can we do? Can we write something else that will help us take away? Or write another decree in the king's name that will say that it can all be undone? And sometimes you can't always counteract evil, but you can counteract evil with good. And so that's what they're attempting to do. Because we can't often undo the evil in our world, but we can counteract it with good, which is what Romans 12:1 says. Goodness can't always undo evil, but it can overcome it. And so her personal response here was, think of a specific situation you wish you could undo for someone, but no, you can't. How can you actively bring goodness and love to the situation? You talked about the tornado that went through town, and I thought I had written down the tornado in Selma, that just hit recently, because it was the one that was horrible. And we can't undo that, but how can we show goodness and love through that? I think we already have as a congregation, we took up a collection and we send it up there to help them by providing things they need. A good friend of my son's, and many of you know him, Will Hayden, is currently in rehab. He is 35. He's had his second stroke now. And so he is rehabbing from that. And that's an awful situation for them. And I would undo that in a heartbeat for him if I could. He's got 2 young children, a great career, and I just hate to see, and his little sweet wife is posting pictures, and it just makes me sad, but at the same time, he's overcoming that, and people have been doing great things for them, helping them out with food. His mom is one of my good friends, and she said he hates the food up there, so we've been taking food in every day. So several of us went together and got gift cards so that, that would take at least a little bit of a burden off of them. And just little things that you can think to do. And so when you see a situation that you wish you could undo, and no, you can't, look for a way that you can at least help, that you can show the goodness and love in that situation. It says, based on God's justice, he could not simply undo the consequences of sin's entrance into our world, but could send his beloved son to bear our sins. So even God saw a situation that he didn't think that he could not overcome because men made choices, but he did overcome by sending his son. Found a way. She has 2. 1 John 4:9 and 2:12. Says the gospel of Jesus is counter decree to the ultimate consequences of sin. And so these are the verses that show us how God overcame it. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only son into the world that we might live through. This is love. Not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his son as an atoning sacrifice for sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us. His love is made great. and others can see God through us when we are showing him that love. And then we're going to end with Romans 5:6-8. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So she goes on to talk about how that things are still not resolved, but that they're fixing to be resolved in Esther. Says, and that's the part that feels like real life. It says, and that's the part that feels like everyday life, that we have some good news, but we're not out of the woods yet sort of experience. And that's kind of where we're going to leave Esther tonight. Still in the woods.
We will finish this lesson next week, so y'all have a great week. See you then. Yeah. Figure out what
Yeah, let's just plan to do that next week.
yeah.
Getting more new, well, I guess.
You want to hear how dark and twisty I am?
I don't know. You scared
Well,
me.
they impaled him on 50 cubit high. So, of course, I had to look up how tall 50 cubits was. Then I was distracted by thinking, oh, they couldn't look there that high to impale. Impale means stab through the.
I was thinking about how high it was too, but I was just thinking. It said it was a flat.
Look, so they.
I remember.
Oh, well, I mean, now it makes sense. It was built to impale. So it makes sense. But there was a lot of work put into just, yeah.
And all his 10 sons too.
I got news for you. I wouldn't have been willing to go. They'd have had to fight me up them stairs. Till I got tired anyway.
You got that right.
Because that ain't the way you want to go, you know?
Lay it back on and say, maybe you can really go up.
That's right.
So all these good things I could have been focusing on. And I get stuck down the rabbit hole of 50 cubit high. And how you going to get him up there and impale? I mean, it had to take several men to get a grown man up there and impale him on that sharp stick.
Or 2 years ago.
That's just horrible.
You know, hey, they were brutal in the Bible days, man.
Yes, they were.
We're not doing real dish by this time. We still working on it, but it's still working.
The Bible is a
We didn't really try it.
very action-packed, very action-packed. Bye, y'all. See you. Hey, with the congregation,
That's how you are. It's nice, but nobody knew, so why would you do that again? Yeah, so we're learning too. Exactly, yeah. Other ways.
Bye.
So sometimes you don't know that, and then you're like, that was way.
Or do you have a crowd down like before?
We don't have as many as last time. Alex, yes, exactly. So, getting close. And did not have any clue why. That's what I was doing. We're gonna sell it to go buy. 21st, when they first had it, they were like, so people, you know, you enjoy this meal, you want to take some home with you, here's a box of whatever, it's $20. And that way, you know, up and then figure it out, and take it and figure it and getting it right first, whatever. So,
I think you will. I think you realize that.
yeah.
Yeah, I get it Sunday, so.
Not always what you bring.
Take what you get.
Wow, but of course,
Oh, I'm sure it'll be great.
It'll be a great job.
I didn't really realize it.
I know.
Yeah.
That was one reason why
Tone down.
And then
It makes me nervous when they're doing it.
I know. They'll do great. They'll do great.
they did that. So they take care of Charles next week. That'll free them up a little bit.
That'll free them up.
Yeah.
Yes.
I told Bill, I said, Taylor's good. I'm excited.
She's busy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was saying, when we had our girls, and I was like,
Oh,
well, we'll make them a lot younger. That's how I did it, yeah. Yeah, and don't remember. You don't remember how it's very
Well, depending on which direction you go and traffic and all that stuff. I went down. And we plotted out to miss Atlanta.
Look a while.
And then we got into
One
Birmingham.
of the, we had 2 hours driving.
Like we said, traffic there forever.
The other was over.
We went down Thursday. This past Thursday.
And the week before, we found the beer. So just having.
Yeah, you're like, yeah, where are we gonna vote? We're gonna vote here.
Yeah.
I think they will. Yeah.
I think they did.
Yeah,
I think they did.
We didn't know the
Yeah,
game.
we didn't, that's right.
Yeah, I don't know what they'll do.
It took 2 days going down because she didn't know what happened. Grandparents Day Thursday. So we stopped in the cafe.
And you know, I was thinking, it seemed like, I got this picture when I see them a lot.
Yeah, the half.
Yeah.
The baby, I said,
And I'm sure, or she didn't call me.
they said July.
Yeah,
She
Mama,
like,
no,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So it's that thought got a job.
Oh, that's how that happens. I haven't gotten to talk to him yet, but I just saw the post on Sunday and I was like, oh my word, oh my word.
The first thing I said was,
Oh, yeah. You are.
sorry,
Shocked. Yeah, yeah. That is exciting. Yes, I bet. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
I told her I couldn't say. If I want to say something in your class, I will raise my hand. Do not follow me. Do not. Yeah, just put my head down. Don't make eye contact.
So are you through with days off?
No, I have to take one more. We're gone this past weekend. This weekend we're going to go to Phillips. We're babysitting for Anderson and King.
school
Well, no, then the next Friday, the next Saturday, my niece is getting married in Memphis. And I wasn't going to take off that day, but then I had the bridesmaid luncheon. And if I don't go, Mark, if I don't go, my mom can go. And so I told Gina, I'm sorry, I got to take off.
Hey, is this your umbrella, Donna?
No, I'm.
Okay.
So I'm taking the second one that Friday, and that should Nope, sorry.